Cool. All right. Thanks for coming for this live show, everyone. I'm James Seconde, and as I was just sort of explaining, James Seconde, developer advocate, which is someone who is in the practicing the business of practicing developer relations, and this is Turbocharged Development with Docker, PHPStorm and Xdebug. So a little bit about me first. I've already sort of been talking about it, but talking a little bit about me. Problem with developer advocates, as you all discover if you have another speaking at PHPSX, is they talk a lot. So I founded the Brum PHP, which is the current Birmingham PHP users group. I also co-host, I think, a kind of mini conference type thing called Fusion. They've done a couple of virtual ones. I've been kind of on dad duty, so I've not been able to do my usual kind of emceeing duties for that. But most importantly, I'm here because I do it as part of my day job with Jump24. There they are, which is a Laravel partnered studio. So there's a couple of links there if you want to have a look at the blog. The engineering blog has got the accompanying blog post to this talk. We do need to update it for Xdebug 3 a little bit, actually. But if you want to see my website, devtheatre.net, you can. The reason why you might want to do that is because I host a technically illegal radio show because I don't have a PRS license. And that is, I'm an absolute vinyl anorak. So I play various all types of music, much to everyone's either delight or distaste. If you want to go on Twitter, which you probably don't at the moment because you'll just see stuff about the inauguration. Let's pray he's not been assassinated yet. There's the horrible bird site at Seconde. And if you are a businessman in a suit or you're a recruiter that wants to give me highly inappropriate jobs, there is my LinkedIn. And if you want to see a horrendous graveyard of unfinished crap, there is my GitHub at Seconde. So enough about me. You didn't come here just to hear me blather on about myself. So when approaching a talk, you need some sort of when approaching the writing a talk out. So we already had this kind of in the works, and I'd written the blog article. You need a kind of theme to make it a bit more fun and relevant. I must say that debugging is not the most rich and humorous subject that I have had the pleasure of approaching. So you've got to try and shoehorn some sort of theme in there. So I found it. You'll notice it's called Turbocharged. So I like to call what we did sports casual debugging. And for those of you who are listening before the chat before, I did drop his name. There is the named after the man, the legend with his millennial stroke salmon pink shirt, with his sort of jacket hoisted over his shoulder. There's Mr. Alan Partridge, and it goes something like this. His 3 debugging methods in PHP that we use every day: var dump, DD or dump, like Symfony or Laravel universes, depending on which you use, and Xdebug. So the reason why I call it sports casual debugging is because I am an inadequate white male that can't really spark up interesting conversation. So I have to do it with cars. So here we go. So var dump. For var dump, for our car comparison, I've given it the Ford Mondeo, and that is because still going. They're everywhere. They're still everywhere in various kind of guises and models. Appeared in the mid-90s, and the absolute complete definition of vanilla. There's nothing. Look at it. There's nothing interesting about it at all. I would like to add for this that I can't. I'm actually still learning to drive, so none of what I say actually holds any weight. And the last time that I did this talk, I did it for PHP Atlanta and Boston, and started talking about American cars, something I know less about. DD and dump. Now, here we've gone for the BMW Mini here because it's an updated design from something that's classic, but souped up by industry experts that makes for a quite nice debugging experience. And then finally, you've guessed it's obviously going to be quite flashy for Xdebug. And I've gone for the Audi TT. That's the coupe. I don't know if it is the coupe. It's that thing. And the reason I've chosen that is because it's flash and it's sporty and it's sleek, but it's not a Porsche, it's not a Ferrari. It's actually quite affordable. So when I talk about affordable, I'm talking about the ability to actually roll out Xdebug. So anyway, enough of the absolute nonsense. Let's talk about tooling at Jump 24, where I work. So at Jump 24, we are obsessed with the quality of the code that we put out. Everything is driven by pipelines. So our continuous integration, we deploy sort of 2-3 times a day, things like that, maybe more depending on the project. And in the pipeline, depending on whether it's AWS or DigitalOcean and what tooling we have, there's a group of sort of standard tooling that we use. So, we've got Composer for all our dependencies, because if you've got a PHP project and you're not using Composer, then good luck. Grum PHP, PHP Code Sniffer, PHP Units. I'll get into TDD in a minute, but so we've transitioned all of our local stacks to Docker now for when we want local development. We use Atlassian Cloud. I would say, some would say, unfortunately, it's almost like a raise your hand if Bitbucket went down this day. All of our code standards for PHP on the PHP side are all adhere to the framework responsibility group. What is it called? PSR rules, which is the PHP Fig. So yeah, the standards of 2 and 12 for the code standards. As mentioned, Code Composer. And Grum PHP is our task runner for any other stuff we want to plug in, and we do have some other things, like, for instance, PHP Code Sniffer is executed in the Grum runner. TDD, everything that we do, everything we ship is all TDD. Maybe not the sort of purest form. Some of it is. I've actually had the pleasure of doing some genuine TDD where we all want to write the tests first. If you don't know what TDD is, good luck, and come and approach us so that you can find out, and so that your business won't collapse. CI, obviously. So like I mentioned, we've got Jenkins boxes, or we've got Circle CI for one of our open source projects, which we'll see in a minute. So the point here is that with all of this tooling, one thing that was not in our arsenal of our sort of day-to-day development was Xdebug. And we just hadn't really considered it. It just didn't really come into our consciousness. And I'm about to sort of quickly explain why it did come into our consciousness. So Xdebug, for anyone that's not familiar with it, here's its author, Derek Rethens. And Derek, just shortly in a sort of in a kind of marketing push for Xdebug 3, put out a tweet. And the tweet said, if any PHP developers that don't use Xdebug are amateurs. And everyone absolutely mad. And there was a sort of a whole Twitter shitstorm from it, not surprisingly. But he did have a point when he put it. The reason why he did it was to actually inflame everyone, because it got people talking about Xdebug, which we did at Jump 24. So we started talking amongst the team of, like, oh yeah, does anyone actually use it? What's it like? So what are our preconceptions? So we had like a discussion about the preconceptions of it. So all kind of agreed it's been around years. Everyone's heard of it in the PHP land. If you're kind of experienced in that language, probably the first thing that everyone always says is complicated to set up. Lots of environment variables and listeners of different IP addresses and all that kind of thing. And probably more important to this, I've just said we've introduced Docker to all of our local. We haven't just introduced, we've had it for a while, but we've got Docker now, right? As part of our local development environment. So with all the containers all talking to each other, surely setting up Xdebug is just going to be more complicated. And probably the eternal question, and it's always this one, isn't it? Why not use die dump or just dump if you're in Symfony? What's the point in having something this sort of like this debugging tool when you can just do it that way? So we need to answer these questions. So we tried it, and I'm now going to show you the kind of things that we found when test driving it, and I'll share with you the experiences that we sort of had afterwards of what we did with what we thought about Xdebug and what we did. So in order to test drive it, we need a project. So luckily, we do have a project. We have a project that we can show you. The good news about Order which is an open source ordering platform, which was created for COVID, so that merchants can use a open source and free service and just sign up and then start selling stuff. It's got Stripe integration. It's free. Go and type in order and jump 24, and you can encourage people to use it if they want a free ordering system that is not chargeable like Just Eat, etc. It's aimed kind of differently from things like that, but it's open source though, and because it's open source, it means that I can expose all the code to you. So as an agency, it's quite handy to be able to do that. So here's the stack. It's Laravel, as I've mentioned. Jump's a Laravel partner, so we've tried to do things with best practices in mind with Laravel. Front end is gradually being transitioned from Blade templates into Vue.js. It's hosted on GitHub, so you can go and look at it. All of the test suites that we've run all gets run in Circle CI on their free open source tier. And then if you want to check it out locally, you can fire it up in Docker. So with that in mind, I've got here's what I prepared earlier, code base. And this is order, but without Xdebug. So our first protocol is, I'm just going to show you a quick, a little bit of the Docker setup on here. I have to kind of rabbit it through. So if you're not that familiar with Docker, you might need to send me some, like, if you want to send me questions afterwards. But it is like, this is the stack we're using. So there's kind of an assumed knowledge a bit, but I can trust that's obviously very confusing for a lot of people because I find Docker immensely difficult. So we've got MySQL, Nginx, PHP, Q that we don't use for this, and we've got Redis for caching sessions, and a scheduler that we're not using for this. So those are our containers, and we've got a Docker Compose. So if I go to if I just bring up Docker Compose, here's our Docker Compose. So in our services, there's our Nginx container. Just see how the visibility is okay. I think. PHP, there it is, with PHP FPM running on port 9000. MySQL, Redis, we'll get to WebGrind later. So there's our stack. Our stack is running at the moment. So just go Docker PS here. These are all our containers running. So first things first, if I SSH into the PHP container, so to try and remember how to do this, Docker executes and the container, which is UKR PHP, and I want to run bash. There we go. If I run PHP, there it is. It's running PHP 7.4, and it's got. Oh, it's not even got op cache on it. It's just kind of plain PHP. So first things first, we need to get Xdebug in there. So I'm going to go into the PHP container for it. Apologies if you can hear next door's dogs. My God, they're so noisy. Docker file. And I'm going to delete that because let's pretend we've not seen that. So in order to get Xdebug into the container, this is the Docker file for it for PHP. So we're using PHP 7.4 FPM is the image from Docker Hub. So in order to get Xdebug in there, we're going to use Pickle, which is it's not the only way of getting it, but the easiest kind of approach is to do Pickle install Xdebug. That's it. That's everything. Of course, it's not everything at all. That will install Xdebug, but we need to configure it. So in order to configure it, we're going to need to inject an INI file, and the INI file is going to be injected. You can do it via the Docker file, which is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. We're going to do it via Docker Compose, and we're going to mount it in Docker Compose into the directory that PHP reads from at runtime every time it picks up new environment variables, configuration variables. So I'm going to add a new file, call it xdebug.ini. That's going to be in the PHP directory. And then I'm going to add some stuff. Forgive me for pasting it. I'll explain what all of them do. So enable it, it's a Zen extension. So Zen extension Xdebug enables the Xdebug extension onto PHP. And then you've got this mode. There are 7 or 6 modes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 7 modes that you can add, and it switches on each feature of Xdebug, which is really quite a cool new feature of Xdebug 3. Another really nice thing, if you're using a Mac, you could use this. There is a similar command in Linux, and I don't know what it is for Windows, but the entry point to a Docker stack when you have containers running is host.docker.internal. So when I mentioned that Xdebug was really complicated to set up, which it used to be, now we've got a reserved keyword for the entrance to the stack via a reserved IP address, which is really handy. So you do xdebug.client host, and that tells the server where to look, right? And then there's a lot of old complicated things with old versions of Xdebug on how to set up, how to trigger things. Now you just have this one command. If you want to make it simple, you do xdebug start with the request, and that will interrupt stuff. So as soon as if this IDE PHPStorm is listening to the port, if a request gets made on the server, it will bring the focus to the foreground. It'll stop runtime or pause it, and then it'll hit the debugger. So now I just need to get that INI file into PHP, and that's going to be done via the Docker Compose file. So Docker Compose, PHP, and in the volumes here, I'm going to mount. I'm going to mount that directory, and that's done by Docker / that's the local path on the left, Docker PHP xdebug.ini, and it's going to be mounted into USR system files, local etc php conf.d and xdebug.ini. That is, simply speaking, the directory that all of the extra INI files are passed at runtime. If you want to find out more stuff about that, you can go to PHP info, or you can go to xdebug.info. My cat is about to jump onto the table. Go away. So with that in mind, I'm going to do a rebuild, and I think everything should everything won't work. Hello, off you get. So yes, I'm missing something. Missing a couple of things. This is a PHPStorm specific thing, right? If you're using something like VS Code, you don't need to do this. There's an environment variable here called PHP IDE config, and you need this, and it looks like that. So the reason you need this is because you might have multiple projects in your IDE. In PHPStorm, it's supposed to be a sort of a one-shot solution to everything. So because you have multiple things, you need to, if you're having a lot of projects listen on the same ports, the IDE needs to be able to determine which is which. So that's the reason why we have this environment variable called PHP IDE config, and it looks like this. It's a string with server name equals, and then the project's server name. So in this case, this order project is uk-restaurants.test, and that's what's in the hosts file. If you don't do that, you won't be able to map stuff correctly when you're in the debugger, which is a real pain. It took me about 3/4 of a day to work that out. And last things last. That's not a saying. We need to be listening on the right port. So you've noticed that in the config, I didn't put a port in, and that's because Xdebug now defaults to port 9003. So if I go to the setup, go to debug, there we go. In PHPStorm, 9003. That's your port. And server mapping. Okay, this is the last thing. God, I really did jump the gun in here. So when you get an incoming request from Docker, it needs to be able to map. You need to be able to map the incoming request to the file system, because as you're then traversing through the whole stack of all of your entire application, if it doesn't know where you are in its local file system, it'll get completely confused. You have to use the servers system in PHPStorm, and I haven't previously touched it because I hate it and I don't understand it and I don't like it. But you have to use it for this, otherwise it won't work. So if you go to Preferences, go to Servers. There it is. So this is the server screen. So the name here, that's the name I want to give it. I mean, that's arbitrary, can be whatever. Importantly, the host is ukrestaurants.test. That's the URL for this. Port 443 because we're not Neanderthals. The Xdebug is the debugger. There is actually, I only found out that Zend actually have their own, but no one uses that. And then importantly here, the path mappings. So you have to select path mappings. You have to put them on. On the left-hand side, you'll see project files, and that uses Jim's site's order core here. That's on the local file system, right? But if you don't set the variable on the right, it will muck up. And the reason why is because every single incoming request, it will think that it's from the public directory, and it's not the public directory. That's technically where you want to map from. So what you do is the absolute path on the server on the right-hand side is var www/vhost, which is the Nginx container. So it basically says the root of this project is here, and in the Docker container, the root is here, and that allows it to navigate it. With all that out of the way, now I start doing the praying game. So I need to rebuild the Docker container first. So I'm going to do docker compose down. And the docker compose down, never docker composer, which I do every time. And now we're going to rebuild. So docker compose up, run it as a daemon. Is it build like that? Can't remember. Yeah. Rebuilding with the pkl command to bring in Xdebug. So if I SSH into the container, docker execute. Now I'm in the container, PHP version. And you can see below that we now have with Xdebug 3. Cool. So that means that Xdebug is enabled. So now we need to actually try and interrupt things. But before I just set off the debugger, I'm just going to show you the Xdebug config, which is new to Xdebug 3. It's quite nice. So in the entry point to our application, app.php, I'm going to do a die test. On that, test, good. I'm also going to zoom in because that's can't see anything. Test. So now that I have that point in the app, I'm going to do a new command, which is xdebug_info. Oh, that's nice. Okay, the old version of PHPStorm didn't actually have that. I've actually got autocomplete on that, which is really nice. So if I save that, you get something similar to PHP info on the web server side, but instead you get like this sort of Xdebug's config, which is really nice. There it is. So if I zoom out, I told you about modes. So those are all the modes of, and you've got things like development aids are enhanced var dump if you want to use that. Code coverage for when you want to really take your app apart. Garbage collection stats if you've got like an app that's really underperforming, you might want to check the memory usage. The profiler is execution time for everything, so that starts where it starts getting really sort of really advanced and in depth. The step debugger will go through, and tracing. Got to be honest. Don't even know what tracing is. You've also got this diagnostic log. So for instance, there's an error here, and the error is I started the debugging client, but nothing's listening to it. And that's true. That's because I haven't switched on PHPStorm. Other stuff you've got here, like the additional INI files. So you can see that the xdebug.ini file was injected by Docker Compose. That's in there. And then you've got all these environment variables. The important thing here being the host.docker.internal. Which is what we set, and the port is 9003. And another important thing is having the, where is it? Not the dump, it's start with the request. Start with request 1 so that we know that it will stop. if we get a request. So now we do the drum roll and I start praying, because I'm going to actually switch on the debugger. There's a breakpoint, which you just do by going into the left-hand side, and you can see that it sort of goes red. And switch on the debugger, which is this button up here. You might sort of see, I don't know, I don't have, like, you can see me sort of selecting it. So that switches on the listener. And all being well, if I reload my application, I didn't touch that. It just brought PHPStorm into the foreground, and it brought up the debugger, which is here. Whew, nice. So I'm going to do a little recap. So our setup, Docker file, pickle install Xdebug, so that's the way we're doing it. Custom PHP INI with Xdebug environment variables injected in the Docker Compose. Can be also in the Docker file itself if you want to. Make sure that you do that PHP IDE config. I don't think you have to do anything stupid like that in VS Code. It's a bit simpler, but then VS Code doesn't have quite the parsing ability, in my opinion, that PHPStorm has, but that's even if you try and configure about 1 billion plugins. PHPStorm now listens to 9003 before it conflicted on 9000. And the client host is docker.internal.host. I should have put on a Mac there. And make sure you start with request yes. And those are your modes. So you saw on the Xdebug config window. Those are the modes. So the important thing that makes this kind of a bit more worthwhile is now I'm going to do some actual live debugging, which is what we came here for. So first of all, I'm just going to show you the actual. I'm going to talk you through the debugger window that we get. So your methods are stepping through the code first of all. So you can see that if I just leave a tooltip, there you go. You've got step over, which is execute the current line, and then move on to the next line. And then you've got step into, which is execute the current line, but if there's a method, drill into that method. So it enables you to traverse the code. You've got force step into, which is when you want to start going into the vendor directory in any third-party libraries that you've got. And you've got step out. So complete the current method and then come back out. And then you've got run to cursor. If you actually click the cursor on a piece of code, as long as that is an executable line, eventually it will just run as many lines of code up until that point. So that's how we. They've got hotkeys as well. So like for instance, F8 is step over. So when I'm starting to debug, I just use that a lot. I'm going to have a sort of example of. I'm going to show you the variables window, which you can see there, with a bit more where it's a bit more sort of readable. So if I take off the debugger at the moment, I'm going to put it into a breakpoint where we can actually read some stuff. So I've taken that breakpoint off, and I'm going to switch the listener off. Now I'm going to reload it, and we get my app, which is called Order. If I go to login. This is just a dashboard, right? It's not actually the user that I want. I want to get a user with some data. This is just a dashboard. This is actually an incomplete app. Like, so, you know, don't judge us. This is a test copy, mainly for me to break. So it's like a dashboard, and you've got like some stuff here, like orders and inventory and opening hours, things like that for a merchant. And then you've got some orders here. So if we open the debug bar in Laravel, this beautiful thing here, which is I'm starting to actually use more and more. Not really handy when you're using Vue.js or React, but so you can see that the URI is admin/dashboard, and it uses dashboard controller, and it's an invocable controller because that's how we do stuff in Jump 24 when it comes to our versions of Lara. We have loads of controllers with invoke, so they only do one thing. Arguable whether that's good or not, but we like that way of working. So bearing in mind that's a dashboard controller, I'm going to put a breakpoint in the dashboard controller. So here's the dashboard controller. It's invocable, so it's only got one method. There we go, public function invoke. and I'm going to stop it here. Switch on the listener and refresh the page. And if I refresh the page, I should be taken to PHPStorm, which I am. And then we can start navigating some stuff. So where's the stack? So our two main windows here are very, very powerful. On the left, you've got the dynamic frame, the dynamic frames of the stack, and on the right, you've got the variables at runtime. So you've probably all seen it either in Laravel if you do a die dump, or well, not a die dump. If there's a fatal and it gives you the backtrace, or in Symfony when it errors and you get that stupid little ghost thing, which I think they've actually got rid of, and it says here's a PHP error, and then it gives you all of the whole sort of stack frame, right? This is the stack frame, but this is dynamic. So I can click through all of these and be taken to the exact line of code that's running it. On the right-hand side are the variables, but they're variables at that point in runtime. So as I navigate on the left through the call stack, I have everything that's being set at that particular point. So I have an entire history of the start of the request through to the finish. So as you can imagine, that's fairly powerful. It sounds ridiculous that I'm saying this because things like, we were talking about Python earlier. Python has REPL stuff like out of the box. And you can kind of do this stuff even if you just open up the DevTools in your browser, and you can actually find a way of getting V8 to do that with JavaScript. PHP devs don't really seem to do this that much. And considering how powerful it is, especially probably the biggest case for using this is when you're an agency or even a product or something, but mainly an agency, and you've been handed a project that's 5 years old of legacy code and someone else coded it, and you've got no idea what it looks like, and it looks like spaghetti, and there's like events being fired everywhere. Having this now, a breakpoint, and then the ability to actually look through the whole call chain and then have a look what's being set at that point is really kind of priceless. And I don't really know why everyone isn't using it. So bearing that in mind, I'm going to do. I'm going to show you a real life example of debugging from the perspective of I've recreated it, but a problem that I came across when trying to run the testing, the unit tests on this project, and it was annoying me. And the reason why I couldn't debug it very well is in the unit tests, you're driving the browser for requests and then consuming the response and then making assertions on it. With that in mind, doing die dumps all of the time is really, really annoying. And this also comes down to the whole question of why not use die dump all the time? What happens if you don't know what it is that you're debugging or looking for? That's the problem. So if I just stop this, I'm going to run a unit test. It's going to be, here's one I prepared earlier. So we're in current directory, can't type, vendor, binaries, PHP unit, run PHP unit, but I'm going to do a particular unit test. Can add item to order. I've got a horrible feeling that this isn't going to do what I want it to do. Good. I really thought it was going to pass then. Good. It's failed. And it's failed because I've got an assertion where it wanted an HTTP 200, but I've got a 422. 422 being a bad entity, I think it is. But because it's this is mocking browser behavior, I don't really have a lot of visibility. I can see where it's failed. So if I go to add to order test of line 114, add to order test, there it is, and I go to line 114. There we go. So I'm making a request, and there's a response object, and then I'm asserting that it's okay, and it's not 422. So really the question is where is that going wrong? So I know the controller that's working because I've got the root. So that's it's API It's not a request. What uses that? It's the create controller. So it's testing that the actual the test is called add to order test. So it's testing whether via our API it will add an order, and it's not. So here's the create controller which adds something, and can see that it's an invocable controller again, and it does some stuff. So cool. Well, if I hit the breakpoint, I can try and debug why it doesn't go right. So if I switch on the debugger and I've got a breakpoint again, I'm going to run this again. And it's failed again, and it's not hit the breakpoint. And that is annoying. But I say it's annoying. It does give me some visibility. It means this breakpoint's not being hit. Because I've not given it a condition. I've just said break here. And it's not breaking here, which means that it's not getting to the controller. And if it's not getting to the controller, what is it doing? So the request, this is quite Laravel-y, but Symfony has something similar to this. The request is a custom request called API create order request. So if I go into that, I've got extends form request. That's the wrong request. Here we go. Sorry, API add item to order request, right? So this is a custom request. This is the actual request that's hitting before the controller consumes it. And there's a bunch of rules. So this is the kind of Laravel-y stuff here. And it says that it needs inventory ID, variant ID, merchant, inventory options, explains what they are. So in this case, two of them are integers and they're required. One of them's a string. One of them can be nullable. All right. Well, if I put a breakpoint here, then what happens? I've hit the breakpoint. So as I've hit the breakpoint, I'm going to look at the variables so I can actually drill down into what the state of the application is. So we've got this at the top, this being the request, and then I've got stuff available to me that's been injected into it. So trusted proxies. Bear with me whilst I just try and sort of like validator equals null. Well, it says validator equals null. And there's not a lot of else that's kind of useful. So I'm going to use the step function. So if I use step over, I've got to form request messages. And then I keep going and see where I end up. Attributes, make a validator. Okay, right. So now it's creating a validator for the request. Okay, set the validator into the service container. Okay, cool. If method exists with validator, then add it, set it. Okay, this is what we came here for. Line 25. If instance fails, then run failed validation instance. So if I step over this, is it going to go into it? Yes, it does. In that case, it's failed, but why is it failed? If I go to instance validator, there's an array called failed rules there. Variant ID required. Well, that's the answer. That would have taken absolutely ages to try and drill down with ddump, with die and dump. So it wants variant ID, which is there. So are we not giving? Presumably, the test isn't giving it. So post this JSON. What's the JSON? The JSON is order item payload there. Merchant, inventory ID, inventory options. Okay, it's not there. So variant ID equals, I should have an inventory variant ID. Okay, cool. Stop that. Stop the debugger now, and then I'm going to run the test again. And I'm going to take off that breakpoint. Gives me a chance to actually show what you can do here. So on the left-hand side, you can do resume program. Oh, no, I pressed stop. Sorry. I've taken off the breakpoint. Sorry. Run again. That's me faffing around. Test has passed. that's live debugging in action. Watchers are available. You might have come across them in JavaScript quite a lot because they're quite handy. Watchers are really, really cool. So if I go to the debug window and bring this out here, there we go. You've got a watches section. So I'm going to show you a bit of live debugging with a watcher in action. So I close this, close the test. We're not going to do it via the test. For the test suite, we'll go back to our dashboard controller. So in the dashboard controller, when I hit that dashboard, I'm going to set a breakpoint, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what happens with a watcher. So can you see on line 40? There's a thing called dashboard metrics, right? I'm going to do some stuff to it. So I'm going to say dashboard metrics equals this. My mystery method. It's going to take itself as an argument, and then I'm going to reset it again. Dashboard metrics equals this. My other mystery method. Oh, so mysterious. Cool. So line 40, I set it, and it's like get front-end statistics for merchant with date range, which is the name of the big long method, right? And it just returns a payload of stuff, which we'll see in a minute. Then I'm going to put it through my mystery method. Then I'm going to put it through my other mystery method, and I'm going to show you what we end up with. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on there, and then I'm going to run it through the browser. Hit the breakpoint. I want to set a watcher on dashboard metrics. And I press return, and it says cannot evaluate expression. And the reason why it can't evaluate it is because we're on line 40, but we haven't executed it yet. So if we execute it, dashboard metrics now is an array of 4. And if I just drill down into that, we can see that it's new order, processing, completed, rejected. And it's 8333. Now I'm going to run line 45, which is dashboard metrics after running my mystery method. And nothing happens. All the numbers are all the same, 8333. Okay, fine. And if I'm going to run my other mystery method, and dashboard metrics are now 22, 153, 130, 127, completely different. So if I drill into my other mystery method right now, I can have a look at the code, and I can see that the code traverses the array and then adds a random integer of 1 to 150, and that's it. That's a hypothetical situation of where one method has not modified everything and the other one has. And that's just an easier way of drilling down into your code, which is quite cool. The next one is really, I'm going to show you probably my favorite feature of Xdebug. And this is, it's available, but you have to get your DevOps team to really make it work for production. And you need to make it work so that you can run it with production data if you want the best results, or you have a lot of data available. But in general, like you won't be able to do this a lot because it's runtime modification. But if you've got your setup right, then it can be really, really rather cool. So I'm going to take out my mystery methods, right? And I'm just going to turn off the debugger for a second and run the dashboard, this dashboard here. Get rid of that. So on our app, you can see that we've got new orders, processing, completed, and rejected. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So the array that you saw is actually that, right? So that it works out those statistics and then pushes them to the front end into a Blade template, which has got some view components on it. So with that in mind, if I run this with the breakpoint and switch on the debugger, I'm going to modify runtime. So it stopped. I'm going to run that line. We've now got dashboard metrics, which we know is that 8333, but I have a live console. Here it is. And I can do whatever I want with this. So I'm going to do dashboard metrics equals this, because I've got this context, and I've got completion as well. My other mystery method, dashboard metrics, press return. And we see 141, 108, 66, and 97. Great, okay. If I close that and then I complete runtime, because there's nothing stopping me from actually completing the request is completed. So if I go to the browser, the browser is now showing up, and there we go. All of those numbers are there. I've just actually interrupted PHP runtime at the whole point of a Laravel application and just modified its output. So if you think about the power for that, you can do anything. You can call another service container if you want and start. It's quite good for debugging APIs and responses and things like that, where you can just modify the output to see what happens. So that's quite cool. Last thing on these on code navigation really is conditional breakpoints, which are very cool. Conditional breakpoints act similar to the similar to normal breakpoints. Like can you see that I'm clicking the button? Except you can add a condition to them, right? Which will happen at runtime. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and our hypothetical situation is that some merchants, when they log in, the merchant is set on line 29, right? It doesn't really matter what it is; it's just a variable. Some people, when they log in, are having problems, and some people aren't, and we need to try and quickly debug it. If I right-click on that, I get a little condition bar in PHPStorm here. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say merchant. The good thing is in PHPStorm, everything auto-completes. So it gives me all the methods that are available to it and everything that's available at runtime. And there's a property on here called allow table service. I'm going to say equals to 1. So that little icon there has now got a question mark and a blue thing. So and that tells me that there's a condition on that. I can bring it up again if I right-click on it. So with that in mind, that breakpoint will only be hit if the condition is met. So if I refresh the page, nothing happens. Here's one I prepared earlier. If I log out and relog in again, and I'm going to choose something different, which is going to be Jim at Jump24. Log in, and there's the condition. It's just been hit. There you go. That's conditional breakpoints. So some features to sort of go through. Move Google Slides. Things that we went through. So breakpoints, console, and steps, watches, the dynamic stack trace navigation. You actually saw some of that stack trace navigation when I was actually going through how effectively how Laravel handles its validators. That was Laravel code whilst I was traversing it and digging deeper into how the logic actually works in it. Conditional breakpoints, runtime modification, and the last thing we'll only quickly sort of go through that, but profiling. So with our demo, inject our very, very lacking humor back into things and our sports casual debugging. So I would say that breakpoints on a console and steps and watches those are the Ford Mondeos, right? There's nothing turbocharged about them. And the reason why is that every single server-side language, and in the case of JavaScript for Node, these are all features that are just regular parts of Java or Ruby, right? Of having these things. Meanwhile, the stack trace navigation and the conditional breakpoints. I mean, the stack trace navigation, is definitely a souped-up thing because it's a nice thing. It's a nice thing of PHP, the way that it's just ended up that the way that we handle states that the request contains everything. So so people might argue that the whole good thing about asynchronous stuff in Node.js is the fact that you can just fire off everything asynchronously. But to have a dynamic stack trace navigation where you can traverse the entire stack for every request is really rather powerful. And the conditional breakpoints are just a really cool little feature to have. Runtime modification, the ability to stop a large request and then actually modify its output or swap out. Imagine if you're in Laravel or Symfony, and in Symfony you can just swap out a version 2 of a service and to see what it does, something like that. Those are our Audi TTs. The profiling also is absolutely awesome, but because of its power, I can only show you a little bit of it, and it's kind of here's one I did earlier, because profiling, when you switch it on, profiles the system execution time of every single thing in PHP, and that is not a particularly efficient thing to be doing. So I'm going to show you this quick example. It's with a container you can get from Docker Hub called WebGrind, which is a PHP application that reads cache grind files, and that is an open source format for stuff that has been what's the output of Xdebug, some other stuff. I'm not quite sure what applications actually use it. So what you do is in the Docker container, Docker Compose, not the Docker container. In Docker Compose, there's WebGrind. So I've called it UKR WebGrind. There's the image, which you can just freely get. And the important thing is you need to bind the temporary directory inside the container to the output of Xdebug's cache grind files, which in this case is storage/Xdebug, which is a sort of Laravel thing. And with that in mind, I can then add in PHP INI. No, xdebug.ini. This is the custom file that we created earlier. If you go to Xdebug mode, you can switch on the profiler by just typing in profile there and then rebuilding. So for here's one I did earlier. I'm not sure if the file is available, but I actually pre-compiled one. So if I go to localhost 8081, there's WebGrind. Zoom in a bit. And I want to show 100% of all the files that have been loaded in there. I do have a file. So this cache file here was created by hitting the root of this Laravel application and then hitting the dashboard. So it's fairly advanced. And what you can do is you can do something like I've just zoomed in a bit so you can read a bit more. When you hit the roots, you hit 3,199 different functions, which are caught in 19,076 milliseconds. You can arrange the methods being called by cost in terms of time. So the most expensive is application resolve, and the second most expensive is array get. So it's any kind of array functions, but importantly, not native PHP ones for the Illuminate support namespace, which is the Laravel one. If I do the invocation, PHP is null and PHP is array are the most cool things. So this is a bit vague because it's a general example. But if you need to do more advanced debugging, the reason where the place where this really shines is when you have service containers where you have services being booted up and the amount of cost that they're doing. So you can see where there are bottlenecks in your application. If you click on show call graph, it creates a call graph in SVG and you can visualize the entire thing. So bit slow. So this is one request, and yeah, there's a lot going on. If we try and zoom in on one, maybe I can find something useful. Oh, look, there's one. That's quite interesting. So, lot of resource being used in this area here, which that small little box there, you can't read it, but that's array map. That's PHP's native array map, and it's the way it's hooked up to the patterns, which is used by Doctrine, which is for, I think it will be the Eloquent ORM mapper. So expect things that are expensive in your app. That's a kind of a quick overview of profiling, but you can imagine how sort of powerful it can get. So a sort of conclusion to this. We spent a lot of time. Looking at Xdebug and hooking it up, and we had Luke, our DevOps engineer, looking at the best ways to run it. Things have changed since we actually rolled out Xdebug anyway into all of our apps, because Xdebug 3 has switches, the modes. So that means that if you want to do a production deploy, you can just switch off all of the modes. So you can actually leave Xdebug server running, but it has no actual overhead. There's things like that that are really rather cool. Probably the biggest thing for me, and well, also for the team as well, is this helps your developers level up massively, and especially if you have junior developers that are starting out, because it gives them the confidence to actually, you can say, do you know what, if you want to debug this and you're confused by it, you can click a breakpoint and you can literally see the entire PHP call stack, and they can debug a variable. Whereas, I don't know, more experienced developers, and I'm fairly experienced in PHP, we don't have time for it. We just do a dump. We just know what we're looking for, and we navigate through. If you're taking on apprentices, they're not going to know any of this stuff, right? And if they're apprentices and they've probably looked into web development, they've probably looked into the world of JavaScript and probably been absolutely freaked out by the state of that ecosystem. So why not level up your team? Because this really is empowering your developers, and that's what we found. Performance-driven development, drilling into the profiler, meant that we can now start looking at performance as a bit like the way we do TDD. Why aren't we creating feature branches where we work on stuff and actually running performance benchmark tests, which you can do on Xdebug. And then if you want to do for production builds and you want to find bottlenecks, you can use something like Blackfire.io. Why not build that as part of your pipeline? So that could potentially be the next thing we look at. Thank you very much for that was a whistle-stop tour. I've been Jim Seconde. If you've got any questions or you want to find out more info about what we do, have a look at the blog posts. Got a newish blog post on speaking at online events, which is kind of handy and relevant considering that COVID is never going away. So yes, thank you, and those are my stats.